Have you ever heard words so strange, so piercing, that for a second you weren't even sure if reality was still intact? I'll tell you this, when my little boy looked me in the eyes, clutching his toy car in those tiny hands and whispered, "Mom said you're not coming back," I swear the ground gave way beneath my feet. And here's the thing, friend, I hadn't left. Not last night, not last week, not at all. I had been in that house, under that same roof, every single day. Now if you're watching this, I already know one thing about you. You want answers. You're here because something inside you got hooked the moment you read that title. And I promise you this, by the end of this video you'll walk away with the full truth of what happened in my home, why my son said those words, and why I can never look at my family the same way again. So settle in, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story, it's a descent into the kind of mystery that crawls under your skin and makes you question everything you thought you understood about love, family, and trust. I want to connect with you directly before we dive deeper, because this isn't just about me, it's about you too. Think about it. If your child, the one person in this world who trusts you more than anyone, suddenly spoke words that suggested your life wasn't what it seemed, wouldn't you break apart inside? Wouldn't you start second-guessing every single detail? What you heard, what you saw, what you believed to be true? That's exactly where I was, and I know some of you have felt that in your own lives, those little cracks in reality that make you wonder if something bigger is happening beneath the surface. That's why you clicked, because deep down you want the answer just as badly as I did. And I want you to know right now, you're not going to walk away disappointed. Picture this, a quiet American neighborhood, the kind where families cut their lawns on Sundays, neighbors wave from across the street, and kids ride their bikes until dinner. That's where I live. My son is 7, bright, funny, with that untamed energy kids seem to carry like a superpower. My wife. She's steady, calm, the kind of woman people describe as having her life together. And me? I thought I was just your average father, doing my best to hold everything in place. Life was supposed to be predictable, ordinary, safe, until it wasn't. Because nothing shatters the illusion of safety faster than realizing the people closest to you might not be who you think they are. And that's what this story is about. Family secrets, hidden truths, and the haunting suspicion that sometimes the real danger doesn't come from outside your home, but from within it. Now, I need you to lean in here, because this is where the atmosphere shifts. That night had been ordinary in every possible sense. Dinner, dishes, bedtime stories, the whole routine. I tucked my son in, kissed him on the forehead, and told him I'd see him in the morning. But when I stepped into his room the next day to wake him for school, his face was pale, his little chest rising fast with nervous breaths. And that's when he said it. Asterisk, Mom said you're not coming back. Asterisk, not in a joking way. Not like he'd misunderstood something. No, he said it like it was a fact, like he had been told something final, something meant to replace me in his heart. And I can't even begin to explain the way those words cut through me, because what do you do when your own child delivers a message that doesn't belong in their mouth? Here's where the mind games begin. In that moment, I started to question myself. Had I blacked out? Had I left the house without remembering? Did my wife tell him something, maybe in a moment of frustration, that he just repeated to me? But even as I searched for rational answers, there was something in his eyes that told me this wasn't just a child repeating nonsense. He believed it, deeply. And if he believed it, then someone had planted that belief inside him. Which leads us to the question you're probably asking yourself right now, the same one that kept me up for nights. Why would his mother, my wife, tell him that? Now before we go further, let me tell you something important. In this video, you're not just going to hear the surface level events. You're going to walk with me through the psychology of it, the suspicion, the moments that made me doubt my own memory. You're going to hear about the conversations that turned cold, the glances that lasted too long, the silence that settled between me and the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. And you're going to see how it all spiraled, piece by piece, into a puzzle so twisted that even now, I still wonder if I've put it together correctly. Because here's the truth. When my son said those words, something cracked inside our family that can't be sealed again. And the deeper I looked for answers, the more I uncovered things I wasn't prepared to face. Things that made me question whether I was losing my grip on reality, or whether someone I loved was deliberately trying to make me lose it. And I know you sitting there right now, you felt that kind of doubt before. Maybe not this exact story, but you've had those nights when your gut whispered that something was off, that something wasn't adding up. That's why you're here. That's why you can't look away. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you everything, step by step, detail by detail, because you deserve the truth just as much as I did. And I'll warn you now, it doesn't all make sense at first. You'll have moments where you think you've figured it out, where you'll believe you know who's lying, who's hiding, who's guilty. But just when you think the answer is clear, the floor will fall out again, and you'll be left rethinking everything. This isn't a story you can half listen to. It's one that demands your full attention because every small detail, every word, every glance matters. And let me say this directly to you, don't click away. Don't let curiosity go half-fed. Because the reason you press play is the same reason I couldn't stop digging. You need the ending. You need the answers. And if you walk away before I get there, you'll never know the truth that turned my family upside down. Trust me when I say this is one of those stories that stays with you long after it's over. Now let's go back to that morning, the moment after my son said those words. My wife was in the kitchen, humming softly, buttering toast as though the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. I stood there, staring at her, wondering if she knew what he had told me. Wondering if she had planted that idea in his head. My throat tightened, and before I could stop myself, I asked her, calm, quiet, trying not to make it a big deal, asterisk, did you tell him that? Asterisk, she froze. Just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. And in that tiny pause, that flicker across her face, my stomach dropped. Because in that instant, I realized two things at once. She had something to hide, and I was about to find out what it was. I stared at my wife in that kitchen, her hand holding the butter knife just above the toast, her back angled slightly toward me. It would have been nothing to anyone else. Just a pause, a second of distraction, maybe even the normal hesitation of someone caught off guard by a sudden question. But to me, in that moment, it was a crack in the glass. A signal that something beneath the surface wasn't as smooth as it looked. She didn't answer right away, which made it worse because in the silence, my mind filled in possibilities faster than she could open her mouth. Was she hiding something from me? Had she really said those words to our son? And if she had, why? Finally, she glanced over her shoulder, smiling in that easy, practiced way that she always did when she wanted to smooth tension out of a room. What are you talking about? She said lightly, as though I'd asked the most ridiculous question. Of course not. Why would I say something like that to him? But even as she laughed it off, the pause still burned in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the laugh was just a little too forced, a little too carefully placed. Now, I know what you're thinking, maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe I was being paranoid, maybe I was letting a child's misinterpretation twist itself into something more. That's exactly what I told myself over and over. But here's the problem. Once the seed of doubt is planted, it grows on its own. And the more I tried to dismiss it, the louder it echoed. I started watching her more closely. I started noticing the little things I'd brushed off before. The phone she always kept face down on the counter, the late-night texts she'd wave away with a simple work stuff, the moments when she'd zone out, staring at nothing as though her mind was somewhere far away. And with each new observation, I felt that knot in my chest tighten, because the woman making coffee in front of me didn't feel like the same woman I married. She felt like someone wearing her skin, someone acting the part a little too perfectly. But before I could press her further, before I could even decide if I was going to, my son came padding down the hall, dragging his blanket, rubbing his eyes. He climbed into the kitchen chair, looking between us with that innocence kids carry before they realize how complicated adults really are. I wanted to ask him again right there in front of her, but something in me held back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was instinct. I didn't want to put him in the middle of whatever this was, and I definitely didn't want to tip my hand if she was hiding something. So I just poured his cereal, pretending everything was normal, all the while knowing nothing was. That day I couldn't focus on work. I sat at my desk, emails open, tasks piling up, but my head was elsewhere. I replayed his words again and again. Mom said you're not coming back. That wasn't something a child dreamed up out of nowhere. Kids exaggerate, sure. Kids misunderstand things. But the way he said it, it was too precise, too heavy, too deliberate. It was like a message. And that's when the darker thought hit me, the one I hadn't wanted to say out loud. Maybe it wasn't a slip. Maybe she wanted me to know. Maybe she was sending me a message through him because she couldn't, or wouldn't, say it directly to my face. That night, after my son was asleep, I decided to test the waters. We were sitting on the couch, the TV casting shadows across the room, and I asked her again. Why do you think he'd say something like that? She didn't flinch this time, didn't even hesitate. She shrugged, said, kids say weird things, and kept her eyes on the screen. But here's the thing, you can always tell when someone's listening too hard to their own words, like they're performing, like they're trying to convince themselves just as much as you. That's exactly what it felt like. And that's when the little things began adding up. Over the next week, my son said it again. Twice. Once at bedtime, once while we were driving in the car. Each time, he said it with the same certainty, as though it wasn't a passing thought but something etched into him. I tried to probe gently. When did Mom say that? I asked. He just frowned and shook his head like he wasn't supposed to give me more. That terrified me even more because it wasn't just what he was saying, it was how he acted when I asked. Like it was a secret. Like he'd been told not to talk about it. That's when the paranoia really took root. I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, though she was careful about her passcode. I started noticing how often she stepped outside to take calls, whispering on the porch like she didn't want me to hear. And I'll tell you this, it's one thing to be suspicious of a stranger. It's another thing entirely to lie awake at night next to the person you've built a life with, wondering if they're keeping something dangerous from you. That's the kind of thought that eats at you, that makes you stare at the ceiling and wonder how much of your life is actually real. But this is where it gets stranger. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m., the house silent. I noticed she wasn't in bed. I figured she'd gone to the kitchen for water, maybe checking on our son. But when I got up to find her, she wasn't there. The car was gone. No note. No explanation. And here's the part that chilled me. When she came back close to 4 a.m., she slipped into bed without a word, thinking I was asleep. The next morning, when I asked casually if she'd gone somewhere in the night, she looked at me blankly and said, "What are you talking about?" I never left. That denial hit me harder than anything else because I knew she had left. I checked the driveway. I'd watched the headlights sweep across the wall when she pulled back in. She wasn't just keeping secrets, she was lying to my face. And in that moment, the words my son had spoken kept ringing in my head. Mom said you're not coming back. What if she wasn't talking about me leaving? What if she was talking about herself, and she was planning something far worse than I could imagine? And yet, there's still another layer I need you to understand. Because while I was drowning in suspicion, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when she was completely normal. Laughing with our son, singing in the kitchen, folding laundry like she always had. It was like living with two different people, and I never knew which version I was going to get. That kind of inconsistency messes with your head more than outright betrayal, because it makes you question if maybe you're the one losing touch with reality. And that's what scared me most, that maybe she wasn't the only one I couldn't trust. Maybe I couldn't trust myself either. But things didn't stop there. They got darker. Because just as I was starting to convince myself I might be imagining things, I found something I couldn't explain away. It was a folded note, tucked inside one of my son's storybooks. The handwriting was hers. And all it said was, "Don't believe him." Now you can imagine the way my stomach dropped when I read that. Don't believe who? Don't believe our son? Don't believe me? Or was it a message meant for someone else entirely, someone who had been in our home looking through our son's books? The possibilities spun around me like a storm, and I knew then that whatever was happening, it was bigger than just a misunderstanding. Something was being hidden from me. Something that could tear my family apart. And as much as I wanted to confront her, as much as I wanted to demand the truth right then and there, I didn't. Because for the first time, I was scared of what she might actually say. I didn't touch the note that night after I found it wedged between the colorful pages of Good Night Moon. My fingers trembled as I slid it back into place, pretending I hadn't seen it at all, because something in me screamed that it wasn't safe to let her know I had discovered it. But even as I tried to keep calm, my heart was racing, and every ordinary sound in the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, felt amplified like the walls themselves were closing in on me. You know how when you stumble onto something you're not supposed to see, there's this sudden shift in your entire perception of reality? That's exactly what it felt like. It wasn't just about a cryptic note anymore. It was about realizing that my wife was playing a game with rules I didn't understand, and somehow, our son was in the middle of it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about marriage or trust. It was about survival, and suddenly I wasn't sure if I was on the inside of my own family anymore, or if I had already been pushed to the outside without even knowing it. The next few days were like living inside a thriller movie where the lines between fiction and reality kept blurring. I started watching her every move carefully, memorizing her patterns, noticing how often she excused herself to the backyard to talk on the phone, how her voice would lower to a whisper when she thought I was in another room. And every time I asked her something small, just testing, her responses seemed rehearsed, too smooth, like she had anticipated the question before I even asked it. My son, on the other hand, grew quieter, more withdrawn, as though he was carrying a secret too heavy for his small shoulders. He started looking at me strangely, like he was trying to reconcile two truths, what he knew of me as his father, and whatever she had been feeding him in the shadows. If you're a parent, you understand that fear, the terror of realizing someone might be rewriting your child's world in real time, reshaping how they see you, planting seeds that could grow into distrust that lasts forever. Then came the twist I didn't see coming, the kind of thing that makes your stomach churn because it forces you to rethink everything you thought you knew. One evening when my wife had stepped out for groceries, but left without her purse, my son wandered into the living room holding a Polaroid photo I had never seen before. His little hands were gripping it tightly, his face pale as he handed it to me like it burned. In the picture there I was, sitting on our porch steps, head bent like I was waiting for someone. But the strangest part wasn't me. It was her. My wife. She was standing behind me in the photo, staring at me with this expression I couldn't recognize. And the kicker? The date printed on the bottom of the Polaroid wasn't from last week or last month. It was from 2 years ago, a date I remembered clearly because that was the night I was supposedly out of town on a work trip. I had never been on that porch that night. I couldn't have been. But there I was, frozen in the photo, undeniable evidence that I had been there with her watching me. I felt the blood drain from my face as my son whispered, "Mom said you weren't supposed to see that." And before I could even ask what he meant, he clammed up, biting his lip, refusing to say another word. Now let that sink in for a second. Not only did my wife apparently have photos of me taken at times and places I couldn't remember being, but she had also told our son to keep them from me. Do you understand how destabilizing that is? To see yourself captured in a moment you can't recall, to be confronted with evidence that maybe your own memory isn't reliable, or worse, that someone is deliberately tampering with your reality? It felt like the walls of my own home were bending around me, like I was caught in a carefully constructed stage play where I didn't know my lines. That discovery pushed me over the edge into action. I started searching the house when she wasn't around, carefully, quietly, making sure nothing looked disturbed. I dug through drawers, checked behind books, flipped through her closet. And what I found only deepened the mystery. There were more Polaroids. Some of me, some of our son, a few of her, but always with strange details, odd inconsistencies. In one, our son was standing in the backyard with a toy he hadn't even owned yet at the time the photo was supposedly taken. In another, I was wearing a jacket I'd only bought months later. These weren't just family snapshots. They were pieces of something larger, something manipulated, something staged. And the worst part was that every single one had the same faint handwriting scrawled on the back. Don't trust him. I couldn't breathe. Who was him? Me? Someone else? And why would she keep these hidden instead of confronting me with them if I really was the person she didn't trust? Unless it wasn't about confronting me at all. Unless it was about controlling the story, controlling what our son believed, what I began to doubt, and how much power she held in that imbalance. That's the kind of realization that shakes you to your core because it's not just about lies anymore, it's about control. And when someone you love is deliberately trying to control your sense of reality, that's when it stops being just a marriage problem and starts feeling like a nightmare you can't wake up from. I know right now you're probably trying to piece it together, maybe even forming your own theories as you watch this. That's good, hold on to those because I had theories too, and I'll tell you, none of them prepared me for the truth I uncovered. Every single day after that discovery, I was living with my heart pounding in my chest, pretending everything was normal while silently unraveling inside. And then came the moment that set everything spiraling even faster. One night, just as I was about to head to bed, I overheard my wife on the phone. She didn't know I was standing by the hallway corner, half hidden in the dark. Her voice was low, urgent, almost trembling. And the words she spoke made my skin crawl. He still doesn't know. But soon he'll have to. It's almost time. I froze. She wasn't talking about groceries or work or anything ordinary. She was talking about me. About something I wasn't supposed to know yet. And in that second, I realized I wasn't just chasing shadows. Something real, something dangerous was unfolding around me. And I was the last one in the house to know what it was. But here's the cruelest twist of all. When I finally confronted her the next morning, demanding to know what she was hiding, she didn't deny it. She didn't laugh it off like before. She just looked at me with eyes I couldn't read, then leaned close enough that I could hear the tremble in her voice, and said words that nearly stopped my heart. You're asking me the wrong questions. The real question isn't what I'm hiding, it's who you really are. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and my family came crashing down. Her words didn't just hit me, they shattered something inside me. The real question isn't what I'm hiding, it's who you really are. At first, I wanted to laugh it off, to tell her she was insane, that I knew exactly who I was, where I'd been, what my life had been made of. But even as I tried to hold on to that certainty, fragments of memory started colliding in my head. Things that hadn't added up before, gaps in time I'd ignored, the photos I couldn't explain, the strange looks my son kept giving me. It was like a dam had cracked inside my brain, and all the moments I'd brushed off as small coincidences came rushing back with a force I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to press her. My voice came out harsher than I intended as I demanded, "What does that mean? Who am I then?" She just stared at me for a long time, her eyes wet, her lips trembling, and I realized she wasn't angry, she was terrified. That's when she finally told me everything, and I swear to you, the ground beneath me hasn't felt steady since. She confessed that for months she had been meeting with people I had never heard of, people who claimed to know me better than I knew myself. She said they had shown her documents, records, even medical files suggesting that parts of my memory had been altered. According to them, I wasn't supposed to remember certain years of my life, years that explained why there were photographs of me in places I didn't recall, why sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night disoriented, unsure of what day it was. She said she hadn't wanted to believe it at first, but the more she uncovered, the more she realized I wasn't the man I thought I was. And when she whispered, "You were never supposed to stay," my knees nearly buckled beneath me. My first reaction was denial. Total, absolute denial. I told her she was lying, that she was trying to manipulate me, that none of this made sense. But then she led me to the attic, a place I hadn't stepped into in years, and there she pulled out a locked box I didn't even recognize. Inside were more Polaroids, more notes, and files stamped with dates and places that didn't line up with the life I remembered. There was even a faded hospital bracelet with my name on it, only the year didn't match up with my own memory of when I'd been hospitalized for a minor accident. My hands shook as I flipped through everything, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. And then I found the photograph that ended any last shred of denial. It was me holding my son as a newborn, but the date on the photo was a full year before he was even born. My breath caught in my throat because there was no rational explanation for that. None. I looked at her, desperate for something to anchor me, and that's when she explained the part that gutted me most. She told me that the reason she had whispered to our son, the reason she had told him, "Dad isn't coming back," was because she was terrified the day would come when I would disappear again, just like I had before. She said there were stretches of time early in our marriage when I had vanished for days with no explanation, only to return acting as though nothing had happened. At first, she thought it was stress or some kind of breakdown, but then when she confronted me, I never remembered leaving. She had lived in fear for years that one day I'd walk out and never return. And when those strange people approached her with answers, she clung to them because it was the only thing that made sense of our fractured life. The climax of all of this came the night after she revealed the truth. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of our bed, my son sleeping peacefully down the hall, and I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Was I even the father he believed me to be? Was I the husband she had built her life around, or just some version of a man who had been patched together by lies and half-memories? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had two choices: either keep pretending everything was fine, or face the terrifying possibility that I wasn't who I thought I was. And so I made the choice to dig deeper. I started reaching out quietly to some of the people she mentioned. One of them eventually agreed to meet me. He was older, with tired eyes, and when he looked at me, it was as though he already knew me. He told me things about my past, details, places, names, that made my skin crawl because I recognized them, but I couldn't place why. He said I had been part of something experimental, something that tampered with memory, and that's why fragments of my life never added up. He told me I wasn't supposed to know the truth, that I had been given this family as a second chance, but that chance wasn't permanent. I was meant to live one life and then let it fade, replaced by another. And when I demanded proof, he handed me a photograph I had never seen before, me standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, but wearing the same jacket I had on that very night. I went home shaken to my core, every nerve in my body firing with fear and disbelief. When I walked into the house, my wife was waiting. She didn't ask what I had found. She didn't need to. She just looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Now you know why I told him. Because I knew one day they'd come for you. And when that day comes, you won't be able to come back." My chest ached as I realized she hadn't been trying to destroy me or poison our son against me. She had been trying to prepare him for the day his father might vanish without explanation. The Polaroids, the notes, the whispered words, they were her desperate attempt to make sense of the impossible. The resolution came not in neat answers but in acceptance. I realized I might never know the full truth about who I was, or why pieces of my memory didn't fit together. But I also realized that the life I had with my wife and son was real, even if the foundation it rested on was fractured. And as I tucked my son into bed that night, kissing his forehead and whispering that I would always be here, I knew it was a promise I couldn't fully control. But it was still a promise I needed to make. The final twist, though, is what still keeps me awake at night. The next morning, my son came running into my room, clutching another Polaroid he said he found under his pillow. My hands shook as I looked at it, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a picture of me or my wife this time. It was a picture of him, older, maybe 15 or 16, staring into the camera with the same haunted eyes I saw in the mirror every day. And on the back, written in the same familiar handwriting, were 4 words that froze me completely. Asterisk, he won't come back. Asterisk. And that's where my story ends for now. Because I don't know what it means. I don't know if it's a warning, a prophecy, or a cruel trick. All I know is this: the moment my son handed me that photo, I realized the mystery wasn't just about me anymore. It was about him too. And maybe, just maybe, the real story hasn't even begun yet.